What's up everyone, Lance Hedrick here, and the topic of today's video is one that I always refuse to do. Osmotic flow is kind of an approach to brewing your conical brew devices, and honestly seems to be rifled with pseudoscience. To anyone that understands what osmosis is, that's not going on because there's no semi-permeable membrane within there, and so the name right off the bat is simply incorrect. No one actually proved me wrong, but just through some of the things I've been doing lately, I went back and looked over this osmotic flow, and I think there are actually good things about it. Not necessarily things that it was created with the intent of, but things that we can look back and see why a lot of people do have success with it, even though the stated reasons are not necessarily accurate. The owner of Cafec, who is actually the person that created the first filter for the Hario V60, so he's kind of a legend, created this approach to brewing. Whenever you pour a ton of water really aggressively, you can kind of block the sides of your brewer, and that water is going to take forever to get through, and is going to be relying on a lot of immersion. So osmotic flow really relies on super low agitation to allow water to continuously be going through, renewing the extraction gradient, and allowing for a purely diffusive style of extraction, which can help lower bitterness and help increase sweetness and maybe even some of the clarity. Leaving the edges dry was actually something a lot of people practicing osmotic flow aim to do, and that's because it maintains the structure of the bloom. And because these people were using largely super darkly roasted coffees that are really fresh, that bloom would cause a dome effect. So you would have this dome forming, and after 30 or so seconds, you would pour 50 or 60 grams into the center very slowly so that the dome allows some bubbles to come out. And you try to retain that crust around the edges. Then you just continually pulse in the center. The dome in the center goes up and down, kind of like a heartbeat. By the end, you have what I would argue, and what I have argued, is a very under-extracted cup. If you maintain that crust on the top and you don't integrate those layers, you're going to have those not playing in the extraction realm. So it's going to focus its extractive tendencies on the grounds below it. You know what? We don't have to keep everything so rigid. We don't have to look at osmotic flow and exactly implement it into our brew. We can take the ideas, even if the ideas aren't articulated well, and try to figure out what they were doing to cause success, because obviously it's a successful style of brew with many people practicing it all over the world. So there's something going on there, even if I don't necessarily agree with the original explanation. One thing we can learn is that slow pouring is going to really aid us in not messing up the bed and causing the ejection of fines and small particles into the paper filter. Another thing is the incredibly low temperatures they use with osmotic flow, which is usually around 80 to 85 degrees Celsius. That's something else that I've been a big fan of, is using lower temperatures in order to retain a lot of acidity without pushing too much bitterness into my cup, even with the lightest of roasted coffees. One thing that I am less impressed about is the amount of pours that they do, though I do understand it. If you pour too much in one go, you will break that crust. And since part of their approach was kind of focused on retaining the crust, if you poured too much, the water would come up the sides and it would take away those dry grounds around the edges and cause it all to collapse. Pouring in that center the way that they do and really allowing it to fill higher could arguably be a bit better. But anyway, we're able to take some of these ideas away with us. This idea of focusing on diffusion, disallowing immersion. That's something that we don't think about very often when we're using percolation brews. We think of just up diffusion through. But immersion is an agent of extraction whenever we're having a stalled brew. Whenever we do the 4-6 method on the final pour, it takes forever to go through because you've been dominating the bed of grounds every time. Let's go ahead and do an actual example of osmotic flow with the darkest roasted coffee I have, and then we'll implement some of the lessons that we have onto a light roast to see if that's going to help us improve our brews. We've got our Cafec dark roast paper filter just to, be on brand. We've got water heated to about 82 degrees Celsius, and we're going to start with our bloom. So the idea is to be very gentle and try to make the dome by going straight in the center and allowing the edge to stay dry. So here in a little bit, we're going to add another 60 or so grams right into the center. See, and if you go too much more than that, you'll break that kind of crust. So the idea is this crust is like the bad taste. You don't want that to be enveloped into your brew. So we're doing what we can to kind of retain all of that inside. And in all reality, though, it does help retain aroma in a way. I can sort of understand the approach there, though for different reasons. Now also, because I'm pouring like this, it's allowing the water to go through without actually bringing a lot of turbulence and agitation to the bottom of the bed. Hitting those bubbles first is really kind of weakening the blow of that liquid going through, which again is a very interesting thing when you consider it. You really need something that's dark and that can retain its crust and give you a lot of bubbles from the CO2 release. And as we keep going, you can see that it's harder and harder for the dome to retain its integrity. Water wants to come up the sides as it keeps going. It's going to want to go up into those dry grounds. It's like it's sucking it in. So regardless of what we want, we're going to have water getting into those grounds. All right, well, it looks like it's already been collapsed, so we're just going to continue until about a 1:14 ratio. With this dark roast, that's really all that's needed. So there we are. I did 20 grams of coffee, 280 grams of water, and then we're just going to let it flow out. But very low agitation, relatively quick in between the pours. We're letting that bed fully dry out, and then we poured our weight. The more you think about it, the more it makes sense that water is coming from below and is affecting those grounds. Now, is it getting full extraction that the other grounds in the bed are getting? Absolutely not. You're still getting a very stratified brew. But I think that's actually why this has been successful, especially with darker roasted coffees. You're going to have bitterness when you drink coffee this dark. That's a no-brainer. But when you can get such an insane stratification of flavor from the most sour acids you're able to get out of these upper grounds to the most dark and sweet and bitter, etc. from the other grounds, it likely presents a pretty drinkable cup for people that enjoy this style of coffee. So let's go ahead and take a sip of this. Now again, this is really dark. I think this is the first pour over I've ever made with this coffee because I just don't like dark pour overs. But let's go ahead and sip. And it's drinkable. You have a little bit of acidity in there, which you wouldn't otherwise get. If I were to brew this the way I normally brew, I'm sure I wouldn't get pretty much any because I would be trying to extract all of those grounds as evenly as possible in a V60, which still isn't super even. But this allows for even further stratification in the brew, which can give you really vivacious cups. So maybe what we'll do is with a lighter roasted coffee, we'll do a similar bloom where we're not fully wetting that bed. We're allowing the edge to maintain a dry kind of situation so that the majority of the bed is further along in the extraction process and the edges haven't even started. That way when we start with our first pour, that one part of it has a head start, other part is further back, and we'll be able to get a more wider array of flavor into that cup. Higher concentrations maybe of some of the acidity that haven't developed as much into the browning type of notes that might be a little more bitter or caramelized. Okay. I like to teach approaches, which is why my ultimate pour-over technique is more so an approach as opposed to a hardcore in these specific areas. You have to do this recipe or you don't get anything because we all have such different taste preferences, different setups, etc. So the osmotic recipe, I like to see it as an approach and I'm learning things and I'll apply it here. Does this mean I'm going to use this all the time? No, but it's a way to understand how you can change things that you might enjoy in order to further increase it to your liking. So anyway, 20 grams of coffee, ground very coarsely, c'est la vie, but that's also part of the osmotic flow steez. Now we're going to do a similar type of bloom. I'm going to focus on the center and be quite gentle. Now the idea here is to allow the water to stay in the bed as long as possible without super running through. Okay, So I did a 50 gram bloom. As you can see, it did not bulge up like it did with the dark roast, and that makes sense, right? There's a lot more CO2 needing to be escaped from the darker roasted coffee, so it's absorbing a lot more quickly. It's a lot more brittle, it's got arms out everywhere, the grounds do, sucking the water in. On this, it doesn't want to do that nearly as much. Now I'm going to go in and I'll do a similar pour for the second, just to ensure we get this nice and wet. But again, pretty slow. And I'm staying in the center. I'm relying on the stream being broken up by the grounds. Now, due to how coarse this is, because we're approaching it like an osmotic flow, I will be relying on multiple pours, but because we're pouring so slowly, it shouldn't be really causing much kind of clogging. So we have that fully dried out. I'm going to go again to the center. Now, near the end, I am going to fold all the grounds in, but we'll retain kind of this osmotic approach for a bit longer. And we'll see how it goes. Now, you would think it's going to be quite under-extracted, especially with a lighter roasted coffee. I'm only at 86 degrees Celsius, but that's why we're attempting to emulate, for the most part, what these brews are like. Now, as we're going, because I'm just attempting to add some of those things to this, I'm actually going to go off script here because it just looks like it needs this. I'm going to pour a little bit more aggressively and fold in the rest of the grounds, as I said I would do. I'm just going to go ahead and do it right now. And now we'll go back to more gentle pouring, right in the center. I'm going to pour all the way to weight on this one. Now, this is going a little bit away from what they, are attempting with the osmotic flow, which is not allowing much immersion. But again, I'm taking bits of it I like, or bits of it I think are interesting, and I'm going to apply it to my own kind of approach. If you see this going a little slower than my normal brews, it's because I'm using the dark roast filter paper, and it's because I didn't feel like fishing out a medium dark, which flow faster. So normally this would already probably be quite close to finishing. The dark roast paper filter takes a little longer than the medium dark. The T90s are what I usually like to use. This I use the T83. And if you don't understand how much filters affect your drawdown, let this be a lesson to you. They affect your drawdown a ton, and you can have a completely different cup by switching up your paper filters. The success of the mellow drip and that type of pouring assist aid is because it does not eject a lot of these particulates through the paper filter, which do get into your cup and which do obfuscate the palate. This was the whole crux of what Ray Murakawa started with when he created the mellow drip. And it's something I've been preaching as well. Paper filters are not perfect. They allow things that are like 30 microns through the paper filter. If you don't think you have a ton of particles under 30 microns in your bed of grounds, you're loco. And so it gets through, you have particles, cell wall fragments, etc., that can obfuscate the palate, cause astringency, cause bitterness, cause repugnant responses. This allows us to help maintain that bed a bit better. Now, it's not as good as something like a mellow drip or a bent spoon like we did in my kettleless video, but anyway, look at this bed. It's very different than what I usually get, but hopefully we're going to have something very different in the cup, something that is much more stratified. Hopefully, it's going to be popping a lot more. This is a geisha that normally I get really sweet Fruit Loop type vibes from, but I'm hoping we get even more intense acidity, normally very floral and sweet like refined sugar, but we'll soon find out. It's actually delicious. I mean, there's a lot of melon in here that I don't get normally as much. And there's also like a, there's a tangy element to it I don't often get. It's kind of like, it's like like a tangy melon, I guess I would say. But there's still a lot of refined sugar in there. There's still a lot of florality that's bursting into my nose from the aromas. That's really nice. Ugo deserves a cup.
I always deserve a cup.
It's true, you do. But I think you'll especially like this one. That's one of the top 3 cups I've brewed with this coffee, I think. You think? Yeah. It's very good. Now, was it osmotic flow? Not necessarily. I don't believe in osmotic flow. I don't think it's a thing. But it used parts of that approach, implemented it. I used 86 degree water. Again, that's super, and this is an ultra-light coffee. This is a Sebastian Ramirez White Honey Geisha, very lightly roasted, and it is tasting ridiggity donkulous. But I think you all get it. Anyway, I hope this video was insightful, not only on some of the osmotic flow. If you were interested, by the way, go check out Kafek's kind of stuff. Again, I've been kind of against it for a while, but you always learn to be humble. And over time, I realized there are actually good things in it. Just because it wasn't explained to me that way doesn't mean it's not there. When I decided to give it a second look, I was like, actually, I've been implementing some of these things myself. Let's give it another look. Let's give it a video. Let's raise the roof on it. Now, I've heard there have been some other good videos done on osmotic flow by some other creators. Go check those out. If I can find them, I'll put them down below. A lot of it's done in Japanese. I don't speak Japanese, so I'm going based off of what I know and what I have had discussions with Kafek about and what I've seen Ray Murakawa discuss. That's what I get from the approach, and that's what I'm going to implement, at least in this brew. Will I do this every day over my 2-pour recipe? Probably not, because I get lazy and just go fast, but this genuinely has beaten out, I think, all of my 2-pour recipes with this specific coffee. But anyway, hope this helps you understand not just osmotic flow, but also how you can borrow from different approaches in order to create your own style of brewing. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please consider hitting the like and the subscribe. It always helps just a ton. Consider checking out my Patreon, where we do lots of competitions, get free gear. It's really cool. Other than that, the most important thing is I hope you brew something tasty today. And cheers.